The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. Christine Meutzner says that when she's driving around Nanaimo, she sees not just the buildings that are there now, but everything that's come and gone through the years. After close to 30 years at the Nanaimo Archives, Meutzner is heading into retirement. The Archives are a non-profit society dedicated to acquiring, preserving, and providing public access to the historical records of the Nanaimo region. Members of the public can do on-site research by appointment at their building on 60 Wharf Street. Meutzner stopped by the CHLY studio to share some stories from the city's past.
My name is Christine Meutzner. I am the recently semi-retired manager of the Nanaimo Archives. However, the joke in our office always was that people had to call me the Queen of Nanaimo, or even better yet, Your Eminence, because I purported to know everything there was to know about the city. So yeah, it's always been kind of a running joke.
Well, your reign started in December 1996.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about what it was like those first days, years working in the archives?
Well, I was not a trained archivist. I have a degree in history, and I had done research for my own undergraduate degree at the archive, so I was familiar with it. So I knew there was going to be a big learning curve, but I at least had the background to know how to research, how to access things, how to explain to people when they came in what they should be looking for, those kind of basic historic things. And I was a real keener then. Oh man, I would just study and study and study, and then I was able to later on take some professional courses, which was great. But a lot of it I learned on the job by looking at the work of the people who had been there right before me, and then just taking a zillion courses and going to every conference and every possible learning opportunity. And I loved it. I love learning new stuff. So for me, there's probably no better place to work than in archives. Every box, crummy old box that comes in with like spiders in it and stuff, is a box full of new stuff I could learn. So for me, I was motivated because it suited my personality so well. And I like, when you're an archivist, you're kind of a little bit like a detective. You're constantly trying to create stories by pulling a lot of threads and following leads, and a lot of them are dead ends. Turns out that wasn't that significant, but you're trying to get that narrative to make sense. So I love that detective work sort of part of it. That was just, and it would, I'd go in and do extra hours just to find out, well, where was that building? Because it bugged me not to know. So, or not to understand what happened in that particular organization, why it didn't survive or thrive or whatever. So if you're nosy, if you're naturally nosy like I am, archive work was great for me. So the first couple of years was just learning the basic stuff, because there's also admin, just regular stuff, being a society, doing paperwork, paying bills, that kind of stuff, learning the archival stuff. The history I had really down pat. I'd actually even won a couple bursaries for my what now seem to be horrible research papers on Nanaimo history. But at the time, I'm sure I thought they were just, the height of whatever. But I had that part already sort of down. So the first couple of years, I'd say the first 10 years was a huge learning curve. And then I sort of decided that in the case of Nanaimo, community archives had to be more than just an archives. We couldn't just be these sort of flatliner people where people, researchers would come in and we'd say, yes, you can look at this. We needed to actually do some mentoring for young people. We needed to reach out into the community more, make them understand that the history is their history, that it's not something dead and crystallized in the past, that every time they walk down Commercial Street or even come to a building like this, say they're living that history. It's an actual living thing, and kind of communicate that to we needed to get out more. We couldn't just be sort of the image that most of us probably have, deliberately never had a bun, because that would have fallen into the image too much. We couldn't just be there and passively accepting people as they came in. We needed to talk about Nanaimo's extraordinarily rich history and all sorts of quirky, regular, everything. But we needed to go out in the community and do that. So we started doing quite a few things, like a lot of talks. For a little while, I did pop-up archives where I would just appear in a restaurant and people could ask me questions. That was one of my favorites. That was fun. And just, there was a time when it was really popular, and it's not now, but at the time it was a thing. This would be like the early 2000s, where you'd sit in the mall all day at a booth. Oh, I hated it even then, but still, it was a thing that people did. So we did go out in the community a lot more, and then archives became a little bit better known. But the truth of the matter is that unless you need to use the archives because you're looking up something about your house or something, it doesn't really play that much into your life. You take it as a little bit of most citizens take it as a given that the city will have an archives, that if they need it, it's there. But they're not like hanging out at the archives.
I want to get into some of the detective work you talked about. When you say hanging out at the archives, I don't know, I think of some kind of, it's the 1920s and we're in a Lovecraftian story and we have to research some ancient evil, and it seems really cool to me, at least. And maybe part and parcel with that is the idea of the detective work you were talking about there. What are some of the things you feel like you uncovered during your work?
Well, one of probably the most significant culturally was for years and years, and it's significant right now because it's Black History Month. We used to celebrate Black History Month here, but we were only ever, as far as I could tell, ever to uncover one person. And to me, one person is not exactly a community. And we didn't even really know if the stuff that we had on that one person was that accurate. And then through just a little tidbit here, a little tidbit there, I eventually discovered that Wellington, which is where Country Club Mall is now, that was a separate town, had a community. It had a population of, I think it was about, at that point, about 3,000, that there was a population of just under 100 Black people living there, mostly from places like Virginia. So there was, in fact, a legitimate reason to celebrate Black History Month, because I always felt really dumb saying, oh, let's celebrate Black History Month, and we'd pull out this one guy. But it took me forever to uncover that, because without photos, without really detailed records of some of these little mining communities, you have to dig deep. I found I had to go ahead by a decade and find where they actually in the census recorded race. And then I had to backtrack, take all those names out of 1901 and see how many of them applied to 1891. And then I was able to kind of little by little pull those threads and realize, wait a minute, these people live here in this house and this guy seems to be married to this woman. And then eventually was able to pull together a whole community. So it was the first time that research had ever been done in the province. It was like a totally unknown community, which was great. So it made Nanaimo's celebration, to my mind, a little bit more legitimate and a little bit more meaningful. But it meant that no one had ever heard of these people before. So I was really proud of that one. That was one of my favorite things. Sometimes it's as simple as somebody coming in and they've bought a house and it's older and they're trying to figure out when the extension went on. So we can look at maps and old building permits and try to figure out how that house evolved. And you might have to look at 6,000 different, well, that's an exaggeration. You'd have to look at a lot of things to say, well, I don't know, is this permit for that thing on the back, or is it for that, or is your house, was it ever permitted, which seems to be a big issue in Nanaimo. So you're able to help people on a very individual basis with their particular little mystery, right? Like, what's up with my house? Or you just constantly, you can go down rabbit holes. It's a little bit like the internet. You have to be careful. Our job is to process everybody in a reasonable amount of time. Sometimes we're so intrigued by a particular little story that we go down that rabbit hole, and then we realize, oh my God, 2 days have passed and we're still looking to find out about Joe's, unknown granddaughter or something. So we have to pull ourselves in, because that's not our job to do every single bit of research. But it is very tempting. It is very tempting.
Can you give me a sense of how you look at Nanaimo, having spent close to 30 years pouring through its past?
Well, it's a weird thing, and other people have told me this too. So if you work in the history field in any capacity, when I drive down the street, I never see what's actually in front of my eyes. for every building, I see every building that was ever on that site, or even if it's the same building, every permutation of that building. I never see, it's like I have if there's such a thing as time-lapse-itis, like in my head all the time as I drive around, I'm constantly seeing different things. If it was like, raw land with just trees, and I see that, then I see the first building, then the second building. It's really annoying if you're like my husband or my children at a certain point, because, geez, Mom, like, it's just a building. But it is a sort of occupational hazard. I tend to see Nanaimo as having grown from a very almost nasty little coal mining town, right? To be honest, in the 1850s, they were dirty little towns. It's on the middle of nowhere, on the fringe of nothing. And I tend to see how much it's grown. And when I hear people complain about it, I feel a little bit annoyed, because it's been particularly challenging here. We do have some weird topography. We've had weird geology in that there's been lots of issues with underground coal mines, that kind of thing. And it's grown so much so quickly that there's no way that any municipal government could have kept up to that. So there's going to always be a bit of a lag here, because people want to live here. So the population has just exploded at certain times. But I do see, I mean, honestly, I'm not one of those nostalgia people where everything was better in the good old days. I don't believe that for a minute. I believe certain things were different. They were just different. But Nanaimo has gone from being a scuzzy little town to sort of has had periods of really beautiful. Now it's sort of transitional.
When you say scuzzy, nasty, can you explain what you mean about past Nanaimo?
They didn't have like heavy equipment or anything, so when they needed a road, they just, chopped down some trees, but they left the stumps. Because the air was so dirty from coal mining, apparently you couldn't leave your laundry out ever, because it would get like black dust on it. This sort of Benjamin Moore notion of heritage colors is not true for early Nanaimo. You either whitewashed it, limed it, or it was some sort of red, like E&N red or something. For the first 30 or 40 years, it was pretty rough, because it wasn't meant to be a beautiful little town. It was meant to be a resource extraction town that was a moneymaker. That's what the intention was. But then they did this sort of other thing in the middle of that. In 1862, when they laid out the town plan, they did a very sort of city beautiful sort of fan shape, because I think there were some people in the town that intended it would be a beautiful little town. But the reality is, if you have that kind of industry, it's going to be a bit messy. It's going to be a bit dirty.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada and generous listeners like you. Support and grow our nonprofit newsroom project today at chly.ca/donate with a monthly or one-time donation. With your support, we can expand Midcoast Morning from 2 to 3 original programs per week to cover local news, current affairs, and arts and culture.
In December of 1996, Christine Meutzner started working at the Nanaimo Archives. Now, she's heading into retirement. Meutzner visited the CHLY studio to provide some reflections on her time in the role and on Nanaimo's past. You talked about having what you call time-lapse-itis, of every time you go by a space, you see everything that was ever there. Are there any particular sites around that are especially, I don't know if I should say good or bad for that?
Well, right where we're sitting here, I mean, this was water, right? And in the early buildings that were on here, the back ends of them, this one was on stilts. And in my head, and I don't know if this is really true, but that was true of all of Commercial Street on the east side, as they filled in all these waterways. Like Terminal Avenue was an ocean tidal ravine. The estuary was much bigger at the millstone than it is now. There was no walkway. There was no Swelana. That's all man-made. The Assembly Wharf, all man-made. So in this area, particular downtown, it's so fundamentally altered that if somebody from 1855 somehow or other, time traveled to now, they probably would have no way to get their bearings. They would think, none of this looks familiar. With the exception of maybe where the military museum is, that little knoll, that's always been there. So I think it was called Mackay's Peninsula in the early days. It's just so fundamentally altered. And that's what I see when I see like water. And I also imagine rats and smelly stuff, and because they also used that tidal ravine as a bit of a dump right up until the 1960s. They when they were filling that in, that they found washing machines and cars and everything. Like, it was, like I say, it was a scruffy little place. And I don't want to give the impression that the people were scruffy, because we had lots of, even during that scruffy-ish sort of physicality, there was an incredible number of cultural groups, like singing groups and orchestras and stuff. So people were not scruffy. They were trying to make a community within that primary resource sort of context, right?
What do you think the legacy of that is today, if any?
I don't know. When I look around, it seems to me like there's a tremendous amount of live theater here, a tremendous amount of art and artists, lots of music. Like, you could, if I wanted to, I guess I could go to a play or some kind of live show almost every night. I think that's really strong here. And I think that might be, not a psychologist, and I'm not sure if you live in a place that's very tentative, like it's a boom and bust economy and you never know if you're going to have work the next day, you might find as a counter to that, the arts to be a sort of constant and a savior. And also, like pre-TV and stuff, you didn't go turn on your, TV. You went and played the piano or joined some group that made music or put on plays or something, In
an interview you were doing a few years back, you said that Nanaimo has reinvented itself, but every time it did that, it seems to have been really big on just demolishing everything before it, to where we have this really spotty housing stock. Nanaimo has this lack of self-confidence, is another thing you said, or it really doesn't like itself. Could you tell me about that idea?
I have felt like that at many times. So it's like many Western cities. If you were a primary resource thing, and when that resource was no longer what you were doing, you switched to another one, often another primary resource. Here it was from coal to forest products. And then later on, you had to switch to a service economy or a retail type of economy. At none of those has Nanaimo ever seemed entirely comfortable to me. It doesn't have, when you go to Ladysmith, it has a very clear identity, sort of heritagey old town. Whether you like that or not, it doesn't matter. It seems quite cohesive. Even little places like Cowichan Bay seem to have a distinct personality. In Nanaimo, you're never quite, it would be hard to say, like, yeah, Nanaimo, so ... It doesn't seem to have that. The ocean part, like the waterfront, feels very maritime till you cross the street. Like, it doesn't, it seems to have these little chunky little bits, and maybe that is authentic and true to itself, that it's been from the get-go kind of a little bit of everything. So I don't know. I mean, when we first moved here, like 30 years ago, I thought we were moving to a kind of cutesy little maritime town, because they had just finished the walkway on the front of that. But then nothing ever happened sort of past that. And then there's just this endless stream of it's a long city, of just strip malls and just lots and lots of shopping. But clearly, to be fair, that shopping wouldn't exist unless there were people to go there. So clearly that's what people who live here like to do, or they want those shops, or we wouldn't have so many of them. I mean, nobody stays in business for fun. So, or at least only for fun. That must be something that the populace of Nanaimo likes. But a coherent sort of singular sort of vibe to it, it seems to not really have that. Or it has like 10 different ones. I've often wondered if that isn't the result of Nanaimo starting off as 6 or 7 little separate communities, and only later in 75 amalgamating to become what we now call Nanaimo. But Wellington was a separate community. Northfield was a separate community. Chase River, separate. And they had very distinct identities long before they was amalgamated. So maybe Harewood was not even part of the city till 75. So maybe that is part of what makes a little bit of dissonance there. I'm not sure. I used to think it was a bad thing. I'm not sure now if it is now. Maybe it's okay. And it's just, that is the vibe. The vibe is that there is no vibe. I don't know.
Well, what do you think a knowledge of the past, working in the archives, studying this, being immersed in it, what do you think it's important that we take away from that as a community, and how do you think it's important that that influences how Nanaimo continues to evolve going forward?
I think you should know, and everybody should know their past, simply because, for them, like the most obvious reason, people need roots. We are Canadian. Some parts of Canada can be very transient. The more you know about your history, the more it feels entrenched, and the deeper those roots are, the more comfortable and secure people feel. I believe that. When you walk down Commercial Street, for instance, and there's a lot of brick buildings and stuff, it feels older. It feels it's been there for, at least 100 years, some of it older. And there's a sense of continuity and stability in that, no matter what the yearly changes might be. People need security, and they need roots, and I think that might be getting to be more and more so with the kind of craziness that we've been experiencing particularly in the last few months, but the last couple of years for sure. That sense of community and roots is really important, and that lives in our buildings. It's just there for anybody to see. It's a free admission to the community's roots by just walking down the street. And I think it's really important for people. So that's kind of more on a sort of dime store psychology level. But also you can learn from if you know some of the history, you know how hard it would have been, for instance, to do the roads here because so much of it was water. It's not just like they slapped a grid on top and said, lay down some asphalt and said, here you go. They had to build bridges. They had to fill all that water. It was a lot more work, a lot more expensive. Things took longer. You have to get those disparate communities to agree, when they became the city, to agree on some things, like how is our tax structure going to work? How was our sewer system, our water systems? How are we going to dissolve all these little, what you would make like petty kingdoms to make one kingdom? It's been a lot of work, and understanding that process and being familiar with that process might make people a little more tolerant and a little more patient and a little more understanding of why it's not been easy. So I don't know, just build, if you know your history, you feel roots, and you also, I think, does help you develop tolerance. You realize nothing that you think is so exceptional and so different. It's all been done before, and it's just the constant cycle of things going round and round and round. And that's okay.
Having worked in the archives for more than 2.5 decades, what is your sense of the things we ought to be preserving and archiving from right now?
Gosh, I wish we had the kind of, resources to be an active archive where we'd have like a man on the street recording everything. We rely on the newspaper, the 2 newspapers, and just social media now for that kind of stuff. Oh, geez. Well, any significant changes at all? I mean, I'm looking across, just coming here today, that empty lot next to you. That has been sort of a bone of contention for people. We should be keeping an eye on that as it develops. What did I do today? Oh, today I posted on we have quite a bit of social media, and today I posted a whole bunch of historic photos from 1962 of the Tally Ho or Howard Johnsons, because it's going to be gone pretty soon. You try to save as much as you can, and for people like archives like us, we rely on the community to donate things that document sort of the everyday goings on, people, places,
What are the things that you would look for actively from community donations, and are there any things that you don't want?
Well, we don't like secondary stuff. We don't want newspapers. They're very fragile, and they're available elsewhere on microfilm, so we don't take newspapers. Oh, let's see. Well, I guess we don't want too much ephemera. Like, it has to be kind of select. I don't want, 57 bathtub posters. One of each year is plenty. The ephemera stuff, you have to be careful, because you could quickly get a collection of that's just sort of memorabilia, and that's not our job. We need stuff like from community groups that keep records of. A lot of these community groups do things like, I'll give us an example, the Canadian Federation of University Women, a really great group. We have a ton of records from them. For years and years, they did a free to all district school children, a seashore thing that they did. It was like a box that you could take and learn all sorts of stuff about the biology of the seashore. Those are the kind of things we want to collect from community groups, because it shows what they did in the community. It's the actual evidence of what that group was about. So community group stuff, their minutes, their agendas, all of that. What projects did they do? You might not even recognize when you're going around. You go, oh, that's a volunteer thing. That some community group decided that it was a really good idea to do a fish ways in the a fish ladder in the millstone. That's a community thing that was done by the Fish and Game, not a provincial project or anything like that. When you look to see how much volunteer works, how much stuff has been done by volunteers, that's the kind of stuff we want. Anything that documents the projects and the people and the things that make this community function, I guess. I mean, it's such a broad, could be anything, but not so much, a napkin from McDonald's, Wendy's. There's certain things that are not especially Nanaimo, like they're more corporate or more chain. We don't really want those things.
Are there any things during your tenure working in the archives that you feel especially glad to have maybe documented and archived, any significant events?
Well, one of the things that I most love that we have is the 1852 Hudson's Bay Company Journal. That's really early. It is the very first record of Europeans here. I love that thing. We haven't, I'll tell you a few things that I really love, but it's just, they appeal to me for who knows why. We have a little tiny diary from 1870 by the daughter of the man who became the mayor. And she's 15, and she's in some kind of a boarding school, some kind of a girls' what they would call finishing school in the 19th century in Victoria. Somehow or other, she becomes involved with her father's clerk, who's a man whose name is Charles, and he is, I think, 32, she's 15. So there's this tiny little diary, and she writes it all a little bit in code. It's when she's meeting him, he's Mr. X, which we love. And this little, she's so young. She's writing about, the party she went to and the pretty dress she wore. And, these two elope and run off to South Africa. And because he had a job offer there. But her father is appalled and writes all sorts of things in his letter book from 1872 or something. This man, Charles, what a bounder, what a rascal. Then I guess in order to cover up the fact that it's happened, there's not much he can do about it. All of a sudden, 2 weeks later, he's the greatest guy in the world. And they're so happy to have him as a son-in-law. So I love that little diary because it tells a lot about sort of Victorian social mores. I mean, we would be appalled now at a 15-year-old marrying a 32-year-old, but it wasn't that uncommon. But it's just so sweet, this little tiny handwriting, and with her sort of very girly things, and then meeting Mr. X. I mean, I'm sure everybody in Victoria knew who Mr. X was. It wasn't that big of a town, and here even more so. Those are two of my favorite things, that early journal and that early diary. Anything we have that's sort of a watercolor or hand-painted I love, just because aesthetically it's beautiful. We have some really beautiful maps from the 19th century. And then I love this sort of funky stuff. We just got in a 1970s Nanaimo local magic mushroom poster with these crazy psychedelic, this is ephemera that we want, because it was printed in Nanaimo from a silk screen, and it's about a Nanaimo happening, or whatever they call them then. Sort of really weird lime green and hot pink, and it's this groovy sort of poster with this mushroom and these weird lettering. I love anything that is so much of the time. Like, it's so retro, kind of neat looking thing. We just got that like last week. I just saw it for the first time today. It's cool. I love a lot of things. There's certain things that, aren't too exciting, like agendas, I mean, yes, they document something, but they're not, you don't get excited reading, oh, look at this meeting agenda, wow. I love things to do with children. I love sometimes just something as simple as a class picture of a grade 2 class from 1940 with these sweet little kids smiling away, and they're just so adorable. It's hard not to like them. We have some other things that are kind of disturbing. We have quite a few pictures of a local group. Mind you, this is of the time. They're all in blackface performing shows in Nanaimo. Yikes. But that wasn't that unusual. It's not like this particular group was the only people, doing stuff like that. And we have some wonderful pictures of a group of women making some kind of Christmas puddings as a fundraiser, and they're all kind of dressed like Aunt Jemima. So we have some really wonderful, we have thousands, tens of thousands of photos, and a lot of them are just, they're so charming and they're so beautiful, or they're very telling or sad. And then you realize people haven't really changed. There's be a picture of some guy with his dog just hugging his dog, and then it turns out it's from 1901 or something. Yeah, people always loved their pets. There were always real, everyday stuff going on. We have some menus that are great because it's a time where Canada hasn't decided if it has a cuisine. I'm not entirely convinced it has decided that yet, but at least we acknowledge that we're kind of fusion. But they, in the 50s and actually from the 20s on, thought it would look good if they sort of admired French cuisine. So we have these menus that have these quasi-French dishes that are supposed to be at fancy restaurants. And it will say things like celery en branche, and then you realize, but that's just celery sticks. Maybe they think putting it in French, it's so cheechy. The menus are beautiful. They're often hand-painted. They're lovely. And they tell you a lot about sort of everyday social conventions. You could say that you went and had fancy French food, and that was pretty cool. The emergence of Chinese restaurants and what a Chinese Canadian menu looked like. We have a lot of those. And those have been researched quite a bit, too. We have so many things. People should just go in, and it's okay to go into an archives and say, I don't really have a particular question, but I'd love to see some of your cool things, because we're happy to do that too. And they will learn stuff just by default then, right? So, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but...
With your retirement, what are you hoping to pass on to the next generation of archivists? What do you hope for the future of the Nanaimo Archives?
I hope that they continue, I have two girls following me. I hope that that spirit of, it's a helping profession. You're there to help people come in with whatever it is. It's not some sort of, 1-800 Google type thing. It's to help people through the research process and to find what they need for their job or for their life, whatever it is. You wouldn't believe the amount of how emotional people get when you find out something about their family they didn't know. It can be quite a moment. Or the person working in an environmental firm who's just trying to nail down what was on that site before, and you can help them. It's a helping profession, and it's very one-on-one. And I hope that continues, that it doesn't become overly formal or stiff and, and too rule bound. I hope it continues. I mean, obviously we're going to have some rules. You can't just be throwing archival documents around, but you want people to feel welcome and to come like it's their history for them to explore whenever they want, free of charge, open all the time. It's what you call a democracy at the simplest terms, because we do have government records, we do have city records. Everything like that should be available for everybody all the time, and I hope that continues. It doesn't get too bureaucratic at some point. So that's kind of my dream for it, and also that they at some point stop calling me and asking me questions. They're great. The new ladies are great. I'm just making fun of them right now. But, and maybe that when you live in a small town, or it's not a small town, a small city, I hope they recognize that we can never just be entirely just an archives. We're going to have to be basically a community resource person. You're going to have to be willing to go out there and help people. That's essentially what it comes down to. I've done dozens and dozens and dozens of talks at community groups. Usually they pick a topic and I just do some research on it. I hope that doesn't change. Again, it comes back to the same thing. I don't want it to become a very narrow bureaucratic thing, because I don't think that serves the community at all.
Christine, thank you so much for coming down to the studio to speak with me.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. Pleasure.
Congratulations again on your retirement.
Thank you very much.
Christine Meutzner is recently retired from her role as manager of the Nanaimo Archives, where she'd been working since 1996. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and R.B. Frew, our technical advisor. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band, Waste Management. Get in touch at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Nanaimo First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.